Well, joining the conversation from Florida is law enforcement analyst Paul Michael Viollis. Paul, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you, Susan.
There have been 18 school shootings in the first 45 days of 2018, and according to this group, Every Town for Gun Safety, this gun control advocacy group, a majority of these shootings are happening at schools with large student populations. Are public schools more susceptible, and if so, why is that the case?
I don't know that they're more susceptible, really, because the risk isn't inherently built into public or private. It's really housed within the individual themselves, which is why the key word in this particular scenario, in the case that we're looking at right now, Susan, is foreseeability. This particular individual clearly fit the behavioral profile, and his actions meet with the violence continuum that made this predictable. So I don't really know that it would have made a difference if it was public or private school. It's the individual themselves.
Is it happening at larger populations, of schools with large populations?
It appears that way, yes. But you know as well as I do, to study something empirically, it takes a little bit longer now for it to really transpire, for us to study it, to say that it's a legitimate trend. What it appears so far this year, no question, it's more larger campus, larger environment public school.
The shooter was described as troubled, showing off his firearms, bragging about killing animals. There are reports that even his mother called police to have them help with him. Many red flags. What could have been done to prevent the shooting?
You know, the biggest part about this, Susan, and it's a multi-level question which requires the same level answer, but first and foremost, what we need to understand about this particular matter is, and I've been working school violence shootings since the mid-'80s. And I can tell you unequivocally, profiling them at that point and today, that it's the same individual. So what that tells us, and what it needs to tell us, is that we are not doing a good job in preparing people and arming them with the information they need to recognize the behaviors that will clearly lead to this type of incident. It's valid, it's reliable information, it's proven that once certain types of behaviors, which is referred to as a violence continuum, once these are shown, and it did in this case, it typically leads to an incident like this.
Does this mean that there are no systems in place, for example, to report someone that you may feel concerned about or is showing violent behaviors?
Right. You know what, Susan, when we talk about it's like the phrase, and it's almost become a cliche, when you see something, say something. And speaking, not just on television, but in radio and in public speaking, I meet a lot of people around the country. And the one thing that resonates with me, that comments that come from our general public, is the fact that, well, what is something? I don't know what to report. What I think is inappropriate may be fine, and should I really get involved?
Showing guns and bragging about killing animals and on your Instagram feed with a gun, that's something.
There's no question about that, but there we run into the issue of social media, and should people participating in social media be held accountable for the things that they read and that they take part of in a post? Should they be held accountable? My recommendation, most certainly, they should be held accountable, but right now they're not.
Every time this happens, we begin another conversation about gun control. No action taken, though. What will be different this time?
What would be different? And again, a great question. What would be different this time? In the state of Florida, this individual acquired that weapon legally, and he passed the background check that is required in order to obtain that weapon. And he bought the ammunition the same way legally. So what would have changed in this particular regard with this individual? Absolutely nothing. This guy was going to buy his gun, he bought it legally, and he bought it with one intent, and this is exactly what he did with it.
Paul Michael Viollis, well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.